So I would like to welcome Willie Richardson from Black Oregon Pioneers. She is somebody who I heard speak, goodness, it was probably about 3 months ago, Willie, I think, for the Reckoning with Race.
I think so. It's been about that time.
Yeah, and thought her story was fantastic, and at one point at the end she said, well, if you want me to come speak at your church, let me know. And I went, hello. So we're glad to have you here, and tell us a little bit about, before I get into the questions, just, I know you go to a church up where you live, and tell us about that, if you would.
Well, I attend Trinity Covenant Church here in Salem.
Okay.
And it is a smaller congregation. It's not one of the mega things. And have been there for quite a few years. I attended several other churches in the Salem area prior to coming there. I believe sometimes I'm placed in a location to do whatever it is for my task in terms of living and being participatory. But right now I'm at Trinity Covenant. I don't foresee leaving there. At least I hope not. I don't want to be a traveler.
Good. I'm glad you found a church home. That's important.
And I've been around, I've been in Salem for over 40 years, so.
Okay, wow. Well, good. All right, so I gave Willie a list of questions, and we'll just kind of go through them. And this is probably the easiest sermon I ever have to write. So, if you would tell us a little bit about when you first became aware about racism. What event opened your eyes to this?
When I saw that question, I thought it was a really odd kind of question to ask, particularly to ask an African American or a black person, because for the most of us, we've known all our lives. It's not anything new. We didn't have to become aware of it in adulthood. You literally learned very, very early in life that there was a difference. You may not have known the word racism, but you knew that things were different, that you didn't have the same options as you moved around into the world as whites. So it's just there, because you're also taught, particularly if you're in the South, I was raised in the South, you were really taught survival skills living in because in fact your life would be at risk if you did not know how to interact or how to behave out in circles, because folks did not see you, white folks, I'm just going to be very clear, did not see you as being equal to them. So racism has been a part of my life, at the risk of telling my age, and I don't mind because God has blessed me, 72 years. So from my first venture out, I knew and felt the impact of racism.
And you mentioned a story when you shared with us back in October about your mother and you walking on a sidewalk and having to go off the sidewalk. I can't remember all of it. What was that about?
It was not uncommon for in the South. You had to sort of move yourself out of the way if you were walking the street, depending upon what was happening. It was not uncommon for you to be in line, literally to pay for something, and others are put ahead of you for service. So it was not uncommon for you to be referenced, with something other than being black or African American. Most folks have been called in their lifetime, if you're black, a nigger. So it's your experiences, our experiences and my experiences have encountered many things
Right.
over time. I worked for, as everybody did, not everybody, but a lot of folks did in the South, to earn money. I worked for a lady, and when you have linoleum floors, you would expect to be able to use a mop to do that. This lady came home one day and discovered that I was using a mop to mop her linoleum floors, and demanded that I mop those floors on my knees, not with her mop.
Wow.
Rag. So
Wow.
the experiences are there as a result of how people look at you
Right.
or view you as a human being. So.
And you've been in Salem for 40 years. What I assume you've had experiences like that here in Oregon.
Oregon is is what a lot of us refer to as a peculiar paradise. It is different on the one hand, but not different on the other. And yes, I have experienced many instances of racism, of discrimination. My first encounter with it in Oregon, really being told by the community, the Black community here, which was very, very small, that in a relatively short period of time, that I would be stopped by the police for no apparent reason.
Mm.
And it happened. It was solely for the purpose of letting me know that they knew that I was here.
Wow.
Not for any infraction, but solely to let me know that they knew that I was here.
Wow.
And so it is there. In trying to find a place to rent, when I got here, the thing that was incredible and that was told to me was, we already have one Black family living here. And of course, my reaction is, what does that have to do with me?
Right.
I'm looking to try to find a place for my family, and you're telling me that you already have a Black family here, which means that you have no intentions of renting to me. We had experiences when we first tried to purchase our home. We've had the experiences with shopping, and we've had to chuckle every once in a while when my husband is shopping, and women are grabbing their purse and men are grabbing their hip pocket to make sure that their wallets are in place.
Wow.
That didn't occur until, we were in the present. So we've had a lot of experiences of, pure racism here.
Yeah. So you're a believer like I am. How do you think God wants us to treat each other?
Well, being Baptist raised, and I haven't lost any of that Baptist in me, even though I'm at a covenant church. I haven't lost that Baptist in me. And it is consistent that you hear all over religion, if you will, in that God created each of us in his image. And he sent his son to this earth to teach us a few things. And he tried to do that before his death. And one of the things that he left us with as Christians is to love one another. That's one of the first things.
Yeah.
And if we are able to get to that point of truly loving each other and seeing each other when we look in the mirror, then we will have, I believe, come closer to eradicating, if you will, the rest of the ills that we have brought into society. it will take away the notion somehow that because your skin is whiter than mine, your privileges are greater and I am less human. If we can get to a stage of seeing that, we have a better chance of being able to feel my pain and I feel yours.
Yeah.
We would have a better chance to be humans to each other, and more willing to challenge others who want to demonize, who want to make less than. And that's the first thing. That's the first place that we've got to get to. If we're going to have any chance of coming into accord, and we're all truly being sisters and brothers in Christ, we're not going to be as successful if we stay separate and divided.
Right.
And particularly seeing that somebody is less than because their skin is different, or their race is different, or their beliefs are different.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get back to the point, or get to a point of being more caring toward each other. And right now we're a long ways, in my estimation, from that as Christians.
I agree.
I'm not talking about the unchristian. I'm talking about Christians specifically now, because we're the ones who said we believe, and if we believe and accept the tenets of Christ, then we've got to be better. If we get better, the rest of the world probably will too.
Amen. Yeah, that's a hope that I have as well. Something you said, which struck me, and actually I've heard before, is answering this question of whose problem is it to solve matters about race. Because I think from some white people's perspective, it's like, well, racism, if people who are of color are being demonized or vilified, it's their problem to fix. But you don't believe that, do you?
No, I do not. Because in that you're asking the oppressed to solve the problem that's not theirs. Because I'm good with me. I'm good with my race. So the problem really, and I think is coming closer to being seen now, given all of the upheaval that we're in and going through at this point, that white people, Christians, have now got to step forward in this fight to eradicate racism and discrimination and the unjust and all the other social stuff. Because the oppressed can't solve that problem by itself. I've been sharing with folks of late this. Black people in particular have been marching and crying out about racism and oppression since slavery. That's 400 years.
Yeah.
And we've not been able to solve it, because if you are rejecting the notion that oppression exists for me, then you're not helping the situation. You're in denial. And until you come out of that phase and see that, all of my marching is not going to go as far as having the blindness uncovered. If you think about the civil rights movement did a lot to move things further down the road, and it put laws into place. But I will tell you from experience, laws did not do the one thing that needs to happen, and is for the heart of man to truly encompass what Christ said, love ye one another. And when you get to that point, you're going to start seeing the disparity that is still taking place, that laws did not change. Now, folks will talk about, well, we don't have the Klan, and we don't have this as prevalent as it were back in the days. You don't have to be visible to do damage. You don't have to run around with a sheet on, a hood on your head, or whatever. You still can do damage by not doing anything.
Right.
You become a participant with it, whether you like it or not. You become a participant when you don't have the strength in your own home to tell a family member, not in my house. Okay? What your views are might be yours, and I cannot change them, but you will not spew that out in my house, in my presence. You will not fill my household with stuff that is inaccurate or not true. If you're not doing anything active to dismantle stuff, it keeps moving. It's just not visible to you.
Right.
It is becoming visible now, I tell you, because right now we are all in jeopardy. My grandmother raised us sometime, and she was saying that, you know, when you get older is when all the stuff that your parents would tell you when you're young and you push it to the side until you get a certain age and it all starts coming back to you.
Yeah.
My grandmother was a wise woman, okay, and she prayed for her children. And they would say sometime, you know, Satan roams, and he eats and he devours targets. You are the target today. If you think about this, when he gets finished eating and destroying me, he's still hungry. So what does he do? He develops a new target. Well, right now, we're all targets by a few. And so in a short time frame, we can become all chained invisibly because somebody will decide at some point that they're ruler and super ruler over you, and your skin color is not going to matter. He just wants to rule. And if we're not careful, we're really headed toward that. So it's not going to be just black people, if you will, or people of color who are now impacted by stuff, racism, as well as all the other stuff that comes with being oppressed.
Right, right.
And the sad thing about it is, from where I sit, is Bible thumping Christians and folks running around with flags that talk about Jesus saved, and Christians who silently sit by, and sometimes not so silent, by their approval, is part of all of this.
Yeah.
All of this, and it is so, it's scary from the standpoint that you can be in danger and don't know that you're in danger.
Well, and Reverend Dr. King talked about back in the early 60s that the 11 o'clock hour on Sundays is the most segregated hour in the nation, and it still is. We still have, I've been a Presbyterian. You talked about being a Baptist all your life. I was brought into a Presbyterian church at the age of 6 weeks, and I've never left. And I can tell you, maybe I've had 20 people in my lifetime that I've seen of color in different congregations. 20, 25. We are a white church, and so I would hope that the white church continues to have a voice for God's justice about matters of race. We've been deciding some things. We've decided we're going to be what we call a Matthew 25 congregation, And part of that is helping dismantle systemic racism and structures of race. And it's a calling, and it's something we need to do. So, hold my feet to the fire. I want to stay in relationship with you and ask me how I'm doing in a year with those things.
Well, you're in a risky business right now, and I use that gently because I am sure, just by my experiences of going around to churches. See, I grew up, as I said, for me, I grew up with my grandmother, and she was a church-going woman, dedicated and truly blessed. And so I have a love of going to church, and I will take opportunity at any time to not go to Trinity on Sunday morning and my car wind up at somebody else's church. And I get very comfortable in them, and that I will sit midways to the front because I believe I'm supposed to be comfortable in God's house. Because I'm in that presence. But what you see at times that occur within congregations is interesting, particularly if it's a congregation that's all white and they've never had the experience of a black person being in their presence. You observe a lot of things. Some of it is surprise and not knowing, and some of it is truly folks extremely uncomfortable that you're there. And so, experiences are what they tend to be. And one of the things that I think that impacts, and you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Some of the things that happens when Black or African Americans attempt to be part of white congregations is not isolation, because Black people and most of us, we know how to adjust with our environment and our surroundings. But they have to experience things that folks don't even know that's happening. For example, it's really interesting to watch folks shake hands with folk, but becomes very uncomfortable with shaking hands with you or not shaking hands at all. That sticks out because you do say, okay, that's really interesting. Somebody's got a problem, but you don't try to fix it because it's not a good place to try it in. If you are, and but this happens in larger churches, and I've seen it, like I said, I'm not talking about something that I have not experienced or seen, okay?
Right.
If you're a greeter, if there's two doors, you can tell when somebody's uncomfortable with coming through your door because they're going to have to interact with you, so they'll go through another. Take that door and then come back to down where you are in order to go down the aisle. So you say, okay, that's cool. You want to be crazy? Go ahead. Or being in a group, having a conversation, and somebody comes into the group and literally speaks to everybody by name and ignores you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's amazing how these things happen. So that means over time that you're signaling, if you will, to that person that you may not want them there, if there's enough of them that does stuff like that. That's the signal, and the attitude then is, well, it's time for me to find someplace else to go, or rather than being miserable.
Right.
The other thing that I think happens to, and I understand that is almost like if being swooped upon, because there is this need and desire to have somebody of color in that church.
Oh, yeah.
And if somebody comes through, it's like this whole thing just swoops down on you.
Yep.
And, sort of, suppresses you to a point where you can't hardly breathe, rather than not doing quite so much of that and allow that person the natural interaction for that period of time to try to decide, whether this really is the right placement for
Right.
me. Whether this is where I'm supposed to be, particularly if they're leaning on the good Lord to try to direct themselves. That's some of why things are the way they are within congregations.
And I have to admit, when I see a person of color who comes to the door on a Sunday morning, I think to myself, well, don't be over enthusiastic, but make sure you welcome them, but don't make them feel uncomfortable. It's so hard.
Yeah, I bet it is difficult, because your brain is working at that time. You don't want them to feel that they're not welcome, but then you don't want to do overkill either.
Right.
So it's that fine line that's there.
Yeah, you want to see them as a child of God and not anything else, and it's a struggle.
And making sure too that they don't feel like that you want them there just to diversify.
Right.
You're try to allow some the space to try to figure out where they want to work. Within the church. And if you see some unique talent, then you might want to take a time and have a separate conversation just to say, okay, where do you want to be?
Right.
And you know that you're welcome to do that. So there, like I say, there's a lot.
Yep.
But Oregon is also a population where we don't have large numbers of African Americans either.
No.
In the city, so you have a small pool to pull from.
That's why I'm talking to you all the way up in Salem right now, because there's nobody black in our congregation and very few in Ashland. So there it is.
Yeah. So I know. I know, and adjustments happen.
Yeah.
We'll get there one day.
Good. So speaking of that, there has been, I think, a shift and adjustment in this past year with all of the deaths, of course, starting with George Floyd, but there have been so many others. And Black Lives Matter has become a movement. What do you think about Black Lives Matter movement?
I see Black Lives Matter as a continuation of movements fighting for the lives of Black people, and they're fighting for their life now. See, movements in this country, long before even the Civil Rights Movement, there have been movements in the Black community to call attention to the disparities that was happening in Black lives. This I see as a continuation of that, picking up the mantle of that by these young folks who have decided to get in the fight, pick up where their elders have left off, because of many of the leaders of the civil rights movement, the last big movement, have been dying off.
Right.
They have been leaving this earth. So
yeah, John Lewis, that was a hard one.
Yeah, that was a very hard one. And so they're picking up. So and the Black Lives Movement really is a peaceful movement. All this chaos that has been attached to them have been wrongly attached to them, as far as I'm concerned. There have been a lot of folks who were supplanted and implanted in that in the movements across the country to create chaos and destruction.
I've heard that as well.
But it's the continuation. I view it as the continuation of the fight to have a life, to have justice when justice need to be, to have things equal, and so it's what is needed to keep moving forward. And it's going to take a long time
Yeah.
for it to happen. And I say that because it's only now that a larger segment of the white community that is now engaged and at least woke to it.
Yes.
And I think that there's a couple of things for me that became the tipping point for that. One, when if you did it, watch literally 9 minutes of the life being choked out of a person, that had to do something to the heart and mind. That was visible. That wasn't hearsay. That was visible.
Yeah.
And he was just one of many black males that had been killed with impunity. The other thing that happened, I think that was a wake-up call, was when Black Lives Matter and all the other protests was taking place. White parents saw a huge number of their children out there.
Yeah.
And that was a signal that we're rejecting some stuff that's come from you. The other thing, and this dawned on me a while back that I started talking about it, was that because these young folk have been raised to a large degree in a very multicultural, integrated kind of society, unlike my generation of yours, when we talk about friends in our lives, a lot of times white people will say, my black friend, okay? These kids say, my friend. You don't know what race it is until you happen to meet that child in the shopping mall or they bring it home. Then you get to see it. But previous generations very, very intentionally, I think, uses the race to identify that friend, which is a signal in one hand that race might be a little bit more important to me than my friendship kind of thing. And if that's the case, what is it doing up in my head? What did I think before meeting this person, or what am I still thinking? Why is that person in your life? So there's some things that are going on that's forcing, I believe, more and more white people, and particularly Christians, to start reevaluating themselves and what the messages they have been sending, and
so that,
how their participation, either by silence or by actual involvement, is a part of what's happening.
So that kind of leads me then to my last written down question, which is, what can you think of specific things that a white Presbyterian church in Ashland can do right now to help with matters of the sin of racism? What are some concrete things you'd say, do this or do that? And maybe there aren't any, but I'm just curious if you have thought about that.
I kind of thought about that, and then I pushed it to the side. I'm gonna give a simple answer. The first thing that one needs to do really is start with self. And I'm gonna roll back a little bit to a story here about Willie Richardson and arriving in Salem, Oregon in 1978, and being here probably a couple of months or so, and going through an absolute culture shock with my kids when we were at the Willamette Town Center, the old, what was Lancaster Mall, and hearkening back to my youth and why never finding yourself in a place, where you're the only black person. and trying to get my kids out. And once I got my kids from the mall and got home, I did not leave my home except to go to work and back. And if I did, I was always with my sisters. It was like we were all sort of hovered together. I had to make a decision at that point in time because that was not going to be sustainable. You're here in Salem, Oregon. You may not see another black person other than your family, for weeks or days on end. That's how few black people are here. So what are you going to do? You got two choices. You can pack up and go back south, or you can stay and figure out how you're going to live here. I chose to stay. And that is when I began that process, if you will, of my dispelling notions about what white people were like. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And creating a life for myself that included all kinds of people in terms of race, and getting rid of whatever my preconceived notions were about those folks in that instance. That is where I think white people need to start individually, not looking at what you can do collectively out there. You got to start with self. When you start with self and do the deep dive into who you are and what you stand for, and deep reflection where that is coming into what your Christian beliefs are, and if you don't land on the right ones, you're in serious trouble, okay? So you got to start there. And when you get that straightened out, then you start dealing with what you will tolerate in your presence, in your home, from your family, from your friends, from your business partners, from your customers, you name it. You stake out where you are on issues and start there.
Right.
Now, I will tell you this. You will lose a friend or two, and a family member might stop speaking to you for a while, but you still invite them, and they can come, but they will be coming under the conditions that they know that they cannot disrupt and spew out stuff at your home.
Right.
You putting your foot down. And when you can get that in place, then you start looking at where else you want to make your voice heard. And I say that because everybody cannot hit the streets. That's not your calling to be part of a marching caravan. But you can do something about in your circles. You can challenge your church and its membership to do better in terms of spewing out stuff that they know is not right or accurate. You can look at what organization or what kind of thing that impacts communities, particularly communities of color, that you might want to participate in. Sometimes that's nothing more than going to a meeting and hearing what people have to say. That might be getting up on a Sunday morning, and you can't do it so well in Ashland, but but you might be willing to get up and find a church sometime and go to, because that's and mentioning that, I'm getting started to preach now. That's the other thing that tends to get you riled up sometime is, don't always want to invite some black church to come in to your house and be the entertainment for you.
Right.
Get up and go to them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Have that experience of knowing what a worship service and church service is like for them. Because that's one of the things that sometimes also keep black people from out of your churches. Sometimes we're animated. We like things a little spirited. We don't want to just come sit there and somebody read something off a piece of paper and send us home in 45 minutes. You know, I'm just being honest with you.
And hey, you're talking to the frozen chosen here. That's what the Presbyterians have been for decades.
Yeah, but the first thing of it is, back to your question, is start with self. Get self straightened out, and then work one step at a time. Don't look to do something big. Big is not always it. I truly believe with all my heart that God has placed each of us on this earth with a plan and a purpose and a mission. We have to listen to him and accept that and lean into it and do it. And that's a little bit at the time. That's challenging this one over here with crazy, and just slowly making your mark, but not sitting silently.
Yeah.
Somebody is inflicting pain and harm on a brother or sister in Christ that do not look like you.
Amen.
That's a mistake. And it's a serious one.
That's a great way to end things. I think that's perfect. And we're certainly going to do what we can from our part here in Ashland. And it's been a pleasure to have you speak to us this morning. I look forward to hearing a little bit more from you on a Sunday morning on our fellowship time. And of course, we can't share coffee and donuts with each other, but bring your own, and we'll get a chance to get to know you even better, Willie.
Yeah, and all the rest will come. We're going to get some good times back where people can travel. I'll show up on your doorstep one Sunday morning.
I'd love that. I would absolutely love that. I promise not to treat you any differently. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off with our camera person. So, Willie, thank you very much for your time with us.
Thank you. See you Sunday morning.
All right, look forward to it. Take care. God bless.
Bye-bye.